The people are praying for him. And those prayers reach heaven, and God decides to send neophyte angel Clarence Oddbody, this kind of strange, bumbling character, down to earth to restore George's hope. And as we come to understand more about the circumstances that have led George to this perilous and despairing moment, we realize much of the action of the film centers around this savings and loan business that George sort of runs on behalf of the town. Remember that? Savings and loan, a bunch of people put their money in, they loan it out to somebody else to get a mortgage, and they pay it back, and they give it back, then more people put their savings in. And we learn about the various times over George's life that business, which provides sort of the whole arc of the plot in this movie, has been imperiled. So the first time was when George's father died, just as George was about to head off to college, and he had to postpone his plan so he can stay and run the business, saving it from the clutches of the evil Mr. Potter who wanted to destroy the company. So George stayed behind. He didn't go on his round-the-world trip. He ran the business, and that was okay. He met the lovely Mary Hatch, played by Donna Reed, and it was very romantic, and they got married, and they bought this super old ramshackle house that's kind of always falling down for the rest of the whole movie. And they actually were about to head out on their honeymoon when there was a run on the bank. Remember that? And they used their honeymoon savings to keep the building and loan solvent. And then they did some more warm, fuzzy stuff, like start an affordable housing development for immigrants. Anybody remember that? You didn't think this was a political movie. It really is. Stable, well-maintained housing for people in low-income brackets, right? They did that. So then they did all that, and that was great. And then through a series of events I'm not going to go into now, the savings and loan, again, got itself into a little bit of trouble. And this time, George wasn't sure he would be able to get out of it, which is how he finds himself in the middle of a bridge on a snowy Christmas Eve, wondering if his life is worthwhile. And then Clarence the angel comes down to minister him, and does that by showing him what the town's life might have been like if he never lived. And in that alternative reality, the evil Mr. Potter had been in charge and turned the town into a sleazy, profit-driven slum with no heart, where everyone George had ever helped lived a diminished life due to his absence. I mean, it's kind of a caricature, but it's kind of a nice thing. And then some nice, heartwarming stuff happens at the end, but I don't want to spoil it for you, just to assure you that everything's going to be fine. Wonderful, in fact. And at this point, I hope I've convinced you that, yes, this movie is a lot about economics, right? It represents every idealistic economic slogan you've ever heard in the progressive wing of anything. It's about the credit union versus the bank. It's about the people versus the profit. It's about immigrant rights and affordable housing, the proletariat versus the bourgeois. It's about building the society that we've been dreaming of. And it's about money. It's about how we use money. It's also about how money can be really tough, how it can be a source of worry and despair and self-doubt that can drive us to the brink, right? And we need to tend to it with attention because it is so powerful in that way, which are what we're trying to do today. And to make the point that there is value in using our money to build up the communities of which we are a part, even if it means setting aside the things we want in the moment, but that we want to do that with open eyes and generous hearts, always, right? Open eyes and generous hearts, which, interestingly, is exactly what Jesus is talking about in his Sermon on the Mount, right? Like we heard from Matthew. It's amazing how this all coordinates. Frank Capra must have been talking to Jesus in 1945, whatever. But before I go any further on that Jesus bit, let me say this. I have already said the word money far more times in this sermon than most churches hear that word said in the pulpit in a year. The average a few years ago when I looked was 2 times. 2 times that the word money got said from the pulpit. This is despite the fact that money was Jesus' second most favorite conversation topic of all time, the first being self-righteousness. Talk about a sermon for another time. Not today. Today we're sticking with money. Jesus loved talking about it. He loved talking about it, which is interesting because we, his spiritual descendants, feel like we need to gird our loins to discuss it even euphemistically once a year during the stewardship sermon, right? We've really got to work up to it. And I can have sympathy for that. It is a sensitive topic. And I want to name that a lot of what I'm about to say today is mostly applicable to those living in relatively stable financial conditions, which is most of the audience here in our congregation. not to those who are in a very real resource crisis. It seems important just to say that and also just to recognize that is the case. But even so, it's a tough topic. Money and the topic of money cuts close to the bone of our identities and to some of the very real fears that we keep inside. Many of us have worried about money or are worrying about it right now. For many of us, it's a source of shame. Many of us have had experiences of being judged for how we use our money, which has left us hesitant about its public discussion. It's awkward because some of us have a lot of it and privilege to go with it, and some of it has less, and it's hard to talk about that. And it's also very true that most of us were probably shaped by very powerful messages about money in our families of origin. Ideas like, there isn't enough, or this is a secret, or each man for his own, right? And part of this whole journey I just want us to take this morning is simply to suggest that it is healthy for us to do some introspection about those formative concepts in a compassionate and curious way. I wonder how I got that idea. It's definitely worth your time, if you take nothing else away from this, definitely worth your time to sit around while you got nothing to do and it's pouring buckets outside and make a cup of tea and ask yourself, what did I learn in my family of origin about money? What are my earliest memories of it, and why do those stand out to me? What associations were made for me about the connection between things like money and success? We don't need to be judgmental. We don't need to get real down on ourselves or anybody. Just sort of follow down the natural 2-year-old why. And we'll get to some interesting conclusions that may be important for helping us live healthily with money now. Or you can even start with yourself today, right? Could you ask yourself with compassion and curiosity, what is your typical approach to money matters today? Right? Another thing that's so interesting about It's a Wonderful Life is that all the characters in it are almost like archetypes of different relationships that people have with money. Right? We got George Bailey, who's kind of like the give it all away martyr type, even if it leaves you totally discouraged and resentful in the bottom of a hole. You're going to do that. We got the Mr. Potter, who's constantly just using money to control other people and to control his circumstances, right? We got Uncle Billy, this sort of like head in the sand character, happy to have somebody else just deal with it, but at the same moment, very fearful the other person's going to do you wrong, right? We got George's wife, Mary, who's kind of a creative type, more concerned with being true to herself than material possessions while she's standing under a leaky roof, right? And those are all just sort of parts that could exist within us. None of them are wrong. They're just parts that might exist in us that deserve our attention. Because, as Jesus indicates again and again and again and again and again, how we spend our money has implications for our spiritual well-being. He says that over and over. Your relationship to this difficult thing has implications for your spiritual well-being. There's just an invitation here for us to pay attention to that, to have those conversations in our own hearts, and if it's comfortable and accessible in our families. To try to answer the question we posed last week, how do we live in wholehearted allegiance to God in a world that will always pull on that allegiance with these questions about resources and scarcity? We need to be thinking about that, because if we're not thinking intentionally about it, it's easy for us to get discouraged. And it's easy for us to get confused like George Bailey did and get fearful when things are difficult or when we don't know where to turn and don't know where to express that or where those feelings came from. So just good luck. Do that on your own on a Tuesday afternoon. And once you're done with that, I have great news, which is there's more too, right? In this passage that we heard today from Matthew, Jesus says, we've all heard before, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And of course, this comes right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount and this whole bit of Jesus juxtaposing what the world says is valuable versus what is really worthwhile from a cosmic perspective. Right? He says, really what is worthwhile is not what the world says it is. And I don't want you guys to hear this as an instruction to just never go to TJ Maxx Home Goods ever again. That is overkill. It's a wonderful place. And we can use our money to bring things into our life that bring us joy and delight. That's okay. But I think there is an invitation here to be thinking a little bit deeper, to be thinking about how do we spend our money in ways that really express our values. How do we sort of think a little bit about making sure that our spending is an outward, active reflection of our inward cares? And to take time to think, what's really worthwhile? Where are we really seeing glimpses of the kingdom? And are we deploying our assets and our wealth and also our time and our attention toward those things for the most part? If that makes us nervous at all, you should hear the good news in both the gospel and what I would consider like our cinematic scripture today, It's a Wonderful Life. There's this assurance that when we do that, when we start to be brave to use our money to enact a courageous and hopeful vision of our lives that's informed by our own introspection, wonderful things actually do happen. Wonderful connections emerge. We start to make space for the Spirit to be at work, to grow our hearts in ways we didn't anticipate, and also to grow God's mission in the world and to grow God's body, the community. And I'm not saying that that's not hard. I know it is. I know a lot of you are watching your investment balances that are the basis of your life, especially in retirement, if that's where you are, kind of go up and down, and to look at that gives you an uneasy feeling in your stomach. It's a hard time. But what I want to say to you is that an investment in the hopeful future of spiritual communities and in works of justice is also a worthy place to put your treasures. What Jesus is trying to tell us is blessing comes from that too. I want to be very transparent, right? This is important. In the coming weeks, you will be getting a letter in your mailbox. Don't be shocked. This is all related, from our church stewardship committee, asking you to think about making a financial commitment to the life of this congregation in the year to come. It's not totally out of the blue that I'm up here talking about this today. To leverage your resources, we're asking you to think about how you can leverage your resources to build up the things that really matter to you. And that's what we hope you'll be doing when you get that letter, is spending some time asking yourself, does this church community represent the things that I value? Can I sense that this is a place where the Spirit is at work? Can I see how sharing with this community is part of my courageous vision of the future? And do I want to give substantively to that? Now, of course, the committee is hoping that you will have said yes to at least one or two of those things in your mind, as you heard me say them. We and I hope that you sense that this is a valuable endeavor, this spiritual community. And that you hear here that in this moment of immense polarization and uncertainty and fear in our world, that supporting spaces of belonging and service where love and justice are of ultimate concern, and where God's inclusive and nourishing word can be heard, is one of the most important investments that we can make in this time today. And that the lack of such spaces in the world would leave it meaningfully diminished, and the conversation around our values and justice meaningfully diminished. And I hope that if you feel that way, that you will really dig down and find ways to join together in the generous support of those goals. Because to be really honest with you, and here's where we're really going to get to the real part, we're going to need some money if we want this place to keep thriving. That is just true. Things cost more now. Heat for this building, just wages for our staff, meaningful contributions to our partner organizations that we care about. They're all costing more. And so we're moving forward, trusting that everyone will be with us as we rise to this moment, because we believe in this collective mission, and because in the year and years to come, we want to be doing even more with it. Because we've just started to think together about these nascent plans for even more courageous ministry from this church, and outreach and service and spirit-driven connection and belonging. And we're excited to live into those plans with your help. I want you to know that I'm going to be inviting our session to be working hard to do some of the introspective work we've been talking about here on an organizational level. What is the culture of money about in this church? How did we get that way? Why is it that way? We're making some commitments based on feedback we got in the mission study to have our finances be more stable, transparent, and values-based. And you'll be hearing more about that in budget season, but just so you know that that is happening behind the scenes. But that is all to say, yes, things are uncertain, and we might despair, but we're not going to. We're not going to, because we are people of faith, and we have this vision that Christ has given into our hands of treasures that do not diminish. Treasures like love and grace and mercy and justice. And just like the choir sang to us, we are going to give what we have in service to those things. We are going to do everything we can to join together and draw back from the precipice of despair as often as it calls to us and give thanks about a word from God which assures us that we each and we together have something to do with building the kingdom that we've imagined. And that, in fact, we're already doing it. We're already doing it. So my invitation to you is let's keep going together. Let's keep giving together. Let's find out how blessed we are by that generous attention to God's invitation. God who has been so generous with us. God who created everything that is and gave us to us that we might be its stewards. God who visited us in time and talked to us about how we might heal and have wholeness in our hearts. And God who appeared in the Spirit to continue to journey with us each and every moment. I offer these words in the name of that God. Amen. We're going to continue with a song before we join together.